Yeah, just like oh, here we go. I'd just like to welcome everyone, and we really appreciate our partners who are on here today. To our I guess this is our third Wider Path Lunch and Learn, and you know, we're coming off of just a tremendous discussion we had with Jeff Wright from Urban Ministry Internationals in November, and you know, we're just going to follow that up, and we're going to have some discussion today of, you know, just meeting our goals as financial professionals, helping to bring together the industry, the financial industry, with the affordable housing needs of the country, and those who are working in this space, particularly in the Community Development Corporation. But before we get into that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan Janczy, who's works for Embrace in the marketing department, and was an intern at a year ago with the capital markets team. And Ryan and the conversation with Sarah are going to talk a little bit about affordable housing in regards to you know, needs of young people, particularly those coming out of college, and the transition that are there. So Ryan, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Brian. And I think Sarah's actually going to take the lead on this first part here.
Yep. Ryan, do you want to just introduce yourself? You've been a huge part of our Wider Path team behind the scenes.
Sure. So like Brian said, used to work in capital markets with him for quite some time, then moved over to marketing as a customer experience strategist, and have been volunteering my time with Wider Path Home and trying to grow our reach there and come up with some unique ideas as it relates to especially first-time homeowners in the younger generations.
So it's really great to have you today, Ryan, and everybody, Brenda and Melina and Terri, and welcome to our third Lunch and Learn series of events. And we are Wider Path Home Foundation. This is our mission. We have a website now at widerpathhome.com that you can learn more about us and our educational resources and our community partners. And today you're having the opportunity to meet several of our community partners and to learn more about the work that they do. And we're just going to provide a little bit of framing ahead of time to set the stage for our conversation. So you can read more about that on the website. And then we wanted to just talk about in our Honoring Stories COP and in many different sectors of our company, we've been talking about equity versus equality as helpful framing. And in our conversations about redlining, as they have impacted the racial wealth gap, and how the housing industry in particular has contributed to, and the redlining in the housing industry has contributed to inequalities that have set in motion that housing racial gap and generational wealth gap. This picture kind of helps us set that stage. So ideally, we would live in an equal country, but I think what we have painted a good picture of using history is that, in fact, we don't live in an equal country, and that, in fact, in the housing industry itself, we have set in motion racial divides and class divides and strategically allocated homeownership to white people or to people who have been lucky enough to secure mortgages, and public housing, invested in public housing for African-American families, Native American families, Latin American families. And so we are thinking strategically about, if we don't have equal access to resources, as you can see in the first picture, and the steps that we're stepping on are not the same, the resources are not the same in our world in terms of access to housing, then we're actually working towards equity. And in working towards equity, we're thinking about what kinds of resources can we provide as Wider Path Home Foundation, as Embrace Home Loans, that will help people who have not had equal access to resources find the resources they need to move closer to equality. And so you see that in the second picture, where you've got the little one with 2 steps, and you've got the medium-sized one with 1 step, and you've got the tall person who doesn't need the step, right? And then we also have been kind of talking about the reality, which is that because of the racial redlining that took place and the racial wealth gap, people who have had access to homes have been able to accrue capital for generations now, that has ricocheted into education and into employment, into all other sectors of society that are sustaining them and having access to the most resources. And so they're seeing way far over the fence. And the little guy and that didn't have the home to begin with is, is struggling to access those resources in the same capacity to build and to be able to see over the fence in the same way. And then if you look at the last picture, we see liberation, which actually would be about removing the fence, right? What does it look like, not only to provide the stepping stools that are needed and the resources that are needed and the combination of resources that are needed to help people see equally over the fence, but what would it look like to just destroy the fence, right? Totally change up the systems that have been put in place, both through narratives and language that our country has used strategically to make sure that people know who's privileged and who's not to get which set of resources. And how do we break down that language? How do we break down those systems so that we all have equal access to the same resources? So that's a part of the conversation that we've been bringing into the mix here at Embrace, and wanted to definitely paint that picture. Also just wanted to provide a little framing around housing and ecosystems. So when we're just right at the center of everything here at Embrace. It's so exciting because we are the mortgage lenders. We are the people who are able to provide home ownership to so many families. And when we do that, there's a ricochet, there's a ripple effect, right? It impacts transportation, business development, healthcare, environment, employment, public services, schools, right? When there's a tax base because of the way that our tax system is set up, and when houses and property taxes contribute to schools and to public services, then communities have other sustainable resources that they can tap into as well. But because of that history of redlining and because of some of the other racist practices that continue in our country, where basically systematically other resources have also been removed from communities, the well-being and the access to resources and to sustainable resources in communities has over time shifted as well, and has not been able to catch up in the same way because we haven't fixed the systems the way that we need to be fixing them, although there's many different initiatives underway in our country. So just to kind of paint this picture a little bit more, the housing picture of our industry, when we think about what is housing instability, I brought this metaphor last time in our webinar about in St. Louis, that statistic that I had heard from a local superintendent via a friend, that 50% of the students are homeless or have housing instability in the St. Louis public schools. And that means that the schools have a hard time connecting with them, with their families, through phone calls, knowing where their addresses are, getting materials to them, finding them to be able to get them plugged into whatever school resources are available. And so when we think of housing instability, that's the picture that comes to me as an educator, that housing instability is about homelessness that has been created when people don't have access to the resources and have not had access to the resources, and they have been systematically ripped out from underneath them through a lot of different systemic practices. Homelessness is something that is very high in our country. The cost of housing is preventative for people to get into homeownership. Even renting is a burden for many people. I have a statistics that says, and Brenda, you'll probably correct me on all of this because you've got the real deal numbers here, but I have a statistic that says that over 50% of people are housing cost burdened, which means that they're paying over 30% of their income towards housing, or over 50% of their income towards housing. I'll let you correct me on the exact statistic, but there's a lot of people who are cost burdened, which means that they have less money to spend on medical care, they have less money to spend on school supplies, they have less money to spend on food. Overcrowding is also a major issue when you look at the history of redlining and racial restrictive covenants that kept people out of housing. And we also have urban renewal forces that continue to come into communities and to displace families and to move them out of generational areas where they have lived. And so all of that instability that happens for families means that whenever there is a home that somebody can access, families pile in. And that overcrowding can lead to environmental damage in the home and can lead to the breakdown of the home in terms of everybody having a safe place and their own space and not living on top of each other. Poor housing quality, when we look at the history of redlining, we can talk today about what that really looks like in terms of the actual built infrastructure of housing, lead especially in homes, and then also just multiple moves. When children in particular grow up in an environment where their families have had a hard time gaining a financial foothold, they oftentimes are moved multiple times. And there are statistics that point to every time a child is moved and has to change schools, that they lose ground in school, both in terms of reading and math on their test scores, but also in terms of how they feel, the stress levels that they bring, their health, their access to hospital care, to doctors, and in terms of some of traumas that they might experience as well in communities that they live in. So housing instability has all of these components to it, and it contributes to these kinds of health risks that you see here on this slide: asthma, low weight, developmental delays, increased depression. And then when you add any kind of trauma on top of that, kids are in a tough situation. And then it also reduces access to health care resources as well, access to medicines, access to doctors, access to phones to call doctors, all of that becomes a challenge. So here's just kind of a picture of what I've just captured, that when there's instability in housing, there's more stress and difficulty learning, there's disrupted school attendance, and then there's poor school performance. And so that then sets kids back again on trying to get back to that ladder of getting the resources that they need to be able to see over the fence. And these are just some of the things that we've mentioned as well in terms of housing and health. That asthma we see on the rise, hospitalizations we see on the rise, delayed immunizations, high lead levels, developmental delays, emotional and behavioral difficulties, high stress levels, trauma, and food insecurity. And then when we think about transportation, there's also systems that sort of privilege certain communities to have access to transportation or not. And so there's just a whole host of ways in which people don't have access to easy employment. If the jobs are not within the immediate community and people cannot afford cars, and there isn't a bus route or a subway that they can get onto easily, then it can be a commute to a job as much as 45 minutes. So the average worker can only reach about 7% of the jobs in their region within a 45-minute transit commute. But there's a statistic here about only 25% of low and middle skilled jobs are within a 90-minute one-way transit commute of where low and middle income families live. So if families live in suburbs and the jobs are in the city, it can be a whole big commute. And depending on bus routes and how well those bus routes function, it can be a 2-hour commute, sometimes a 3-hour commute. People can be getting up at 4 a.m. to get to work on time. So this is a massive issue that is tied to housing and the resources in the community. And then housing and employment. The more that housing is the center of communities and there is stable housing and people can access it and it's affordable, or they have vouchers or some kind of subsidized resources that enable them to stay in a home and secure stable home ownership, the better the job situation is for everybody in a community. And the more that there is stability in the community because there are resources that are in flux now and people are able to, the property taxes are flowing into the community, or people have dispensable income that they can spend and they can hire people, they can build businesses, and there's just better employment opportunities overall. So just wanted to kind of give that kind of a picture before we started our conversation and just summarize this with some of some of the research out there on that stable housing reduces all types of stress. We don't ever think about how stress factors into the housing situation, but that stress is a killer on people and leads to a lot of trauma as well. And it reduces childhood poverty. If you have a strategy for making sure that people can access affordable housing, you are a part of reducing childhood poverty and economic mobility, hands down. And affordable housing also bolsters our economy. This statistic is pretty exciting that if we could not have so much limited access to affordable housing, we would probably have $2 trillion more in our economy because people would have income and stability that they are building with to be able to put financial resources in flux in the economy and to spend and purchase and everything else that comes with that. So just want to add one more exclamation point to this and bring Ryan in. Ryan, when you talk about student debt and you talk about college, do you want to just kind of bring that into our equation for us too?
Yeah, sure. Along a lot of these conversations that we've had in the Wider Path Home Foundation Leadership Group, we've talked about barriers and access to education and barriers to home ownership. And kind of along these conversations, my personal story and journey has come into play here. And I know my story is not uncommon to a lot of others looking to get into their own home as well. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here in this conversation is just kind of the state of student debt and how that impacts home ownership. Housing affordability is worsening and leaving the future home buyers with student debt at a severe disadvantage. not to take away from any other disadvantages or social injustices out there. There's clearly a big impact there as well. But there are a lot of concerns, and that there is a student loan bubble, and how that impacts housing is very important to look at in the future, especially for those loan officers here and trying to access that bucket of potential home buyers. It's really important to take a look at the state of things. So the National Association of Realtors released a study about a month ago, and they've been gaining data for the past 8 years or so. And this conversation and this topic came up to them because one of the leaders in the organization who had a high amount of student debt, she was looking into getting a home and realized she couldn't. So that kind of goes to show that these topics aren't necessarily at the forefront of the housing industry, and they do deserve some recognition and some conversation there. So some of the results of that report, 50% of people who haven't yet purchased a loan blame their student debt. 87% of those 50% say they are interested in owning a home and do have that as a dream and have put in some kind of work or thought into owning a home. 60% of millennials say they can't even think about owning a home due to their student debt, and that's 30% of boomers as well. So when we think about millennials and boomers, that's pretty much the ages of 25 to 65. That's a huge population there. And Sarah, if we can share that screen for the student loan debt statistics, that would be great.
I took them out. Sorry, Ryan.
Oh, no worries. So I'll read them a little bit off, but right now there's $1.75 trillion of student loan debt, and that grows 6 times faster than the national economy. By many standards, people would consider that a bubble. At some point, that's going to burst. At some point, there are implications to that, especially in housing. At the center of our communities, it's always housing, and how that impacts all of us. It's enormous. The average student debt right now, currently, for 43.2 million student borrowers is roughly $40,000 each. And that's the current state. So that doesn't include the amount of loans that have already been paid off. But the average student borrower right now, regardless of age, is about $40,000. That's immense. And when we're thinking about awareness of costs, when we're getting into college, and this is something that I relate to very strongly, I feel as though there wasn't a great deal of education in terms of warning student borrowers of how going to college could be an opportunity cost, or the limitations that of going to college, kind of the limitations of home ownership, the implications of going to school and how that impacts home ownership. 18% of student debt holders say they had a good understanding of college debt and how those finances impact you after college. I think there's a huge gap in terms of education before people go to college and how that massive amount of debt pays off. Not once was home ownership or the affordability of the home brought into those conversations for me. It was mostly about the loan terms and how to pay off your debt. That was the education that I received. So there's a huge gap there. And I think just moving forward, there needs to be some sort of education, whether it's those people who are in student debt already and they're in repayment and they're looking to buy a home ownership, but they're facing blockers, down payment assistance programs. And there are options out there for students and different types of loans and things like that. I recently had a conversation with our own Audley Lewis about my potential home ownership journey and what kind of options I face. And it was clear to me that there's a lot of barriers. The DTI is huge. It's a huge issue for a lot of student borrowers, and kind of moving forward, it's like, how do we overcome those barriers? How do we get that home ownership to be a real dream for people that want to go to college, and it shouldn't have to be an opportunity cost. So that's just something that I kind of wanted to bring up here. It's a huge bubble. It's a huge topic of conversation that should be addressed. And that the average age of a homeowner is going to continue to rise as long as we don't give access to educational resources and kind of share these home ownership stories along the way. And that's exactly why I'm contributing my efforts and ideas and doing as much as I can with Wider Path and why we're doing the things that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was so helpful. So the student debt and loans, that's a huge part of this conversation too. How do you begin to pull yourself up into homeownership or into wealth building when you have college to manage and homes and affordable housing? that you're trying to get into. So just as a final point on our framing, and then we're going to turn this over to our panel. Basically, here at Embrace, here in Wider Path, we're really thinking about how can we be a part of expanding what we do and growing what we do and making sure that we are connecting well with a wide variety of communities and that we have a diversity of products, first-time homebuyer products, which Embrace has, and that we're really capitalizing on those products and connecting with families. And as we're making sure that we're thinking about our own markets that we're working in and expanding those markets, that we are also just opening doors. We're thinking about building relationships and bridges and opening doors so that we can diversify Embrace as well, which just helps us become even more successful and working well and innovating with communities who understand the products that are needed in the communities that we're eager to serve. So I'm going to turn this over to our panelists here, and we're going to have a good conversation. I want to just say this about Wider Path Home, which is that we're really honing in on supporting community development and our community developers who are working hard to preserve and sustain affordable housing. And we're really focused in on housing education for all the reasons that Ryan explained and for all of the ways that that helps people have one more set of resources to understand how to look over that fence or begin to break down that fence. And so we have Brenda with us, we have Melina Lodge, we have Terri Francis, and I'm going to let them each introduce themselves, and then I have a series of questions for you. So Brenda, would you like to get started?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me back again, and glad to see everyone. Brenda, my name is Brenda Clement, and I'm director of HousingWorks Rhode Island, which is located at Roger Williams University. The main campus for Roger Williams is in Bristol, for those of you who are from Rhode Island, but we are actually at the Providence campus. And we are a research and policy organization that looks at the connectedness between housing and all of the things that you've already talked about how it impacts economic growth in the state, but also health outcomes and educational attainment and achievement in the state as well too. We produce an annual housing fact book that has lots of data and information about the state, broken down by region and by individual communities. We'll be back and forth talking a little bit about some of that specific Rhode Island data as our conversation proceeds. So I'll stop there and let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Thank you so much. Melina, would you like to?
Sure. My name is Melina Lodge. I'm the executive director of the Housing Network and the Community Housing Land Trust of Rhode Island. Actually, two separate nonprofits. The Housing Network is the trade association for community development corporations and nonprofit housing developers across the state. We serve as the advocacy and policy arm on their behalf. And in the most recent 3 years, maybe, we're the backbone organization for a collaborative collective impact approach to housing advocacy across the state called Homes RI. We have almost 100 organizations that participate in that process with us. And we've been able to actually get some real important legislative wins, sort of mobilizing that community. The Community Housing Land Trust is really a land trust. So we have that, but we also provide technical assistance and monitoring compliance on almost 800 affordable housing units across the state. So we do that too.
So exciting and so wonderful to have you, Melina. I had to say it 3 times, Melina. Okay. And Terri, want to introduce yourself?
Yes, can you hear me okay? All right, perfect. Thank you so much for allowing me to join. My name is Terri Francis. I am the Neighborhood Revitalization Coordinator with the City of Newport News. In this role, I actually have the pleasure of working with the City's Choice Neighborhood Initiative, which is an initiative through HUD where we leverage public and private investments to replace distressed communities and neighborhoods. So I'm really excited to be a part of today's conversation, and hopefully I can help you all to learn more about the Choice Neighborhood Initiative and definitely how Wider Path has helped me in my role as a housing counselor.
It's so great to have you, Terri, and so good to see you. My first question for our panelists is this: what is the state of affordable housing on the federal level and in your state? And anybody can start, but actually, Brenda, do you want to kind of start us off on the federal level conversation?
Sure. I mean, you've already talked a little bit about some of the challenges that we see across the field in housing, particularly for lower income renters and people who are very low wage workers. Our fact book shows every year and reports through some of our national partners like National Low Income Housing Coalition and National Housing Conference show that particularly lower wage workers struggle tremendously to keep a roof over their head. And these are workers that ironically, you know, at the height of the pandemic were our critical essential workers, right? These are people who are taking care of our seniors and assisted living and nursing homes. These are the people who are keeping us safe and clean in community health programs and in hospitals, watching our children in daycare. And those are the people who are most at risk and most struggling. You know, and I think why this is important and why this matters is that for most of us, unless you get some stability in your life around housing, you cannot continue to move forward to acquire assets like housing. So a good solid rent, for some people, rental is the right option and will be the right option for most of their lives. And there's nothing wrong with that. But many people, in order to get on a path to homeownership, need good, stable rental housing in order to be able to get themselves in a position where they can move further down the path as well. So, Sarah, you put up some of the statistics from our fact book, and right now, for the first time since we've been putting the fact book together, the median household income of $67,000 in Rhode Island cannot afford to buy in any municipality in Rhode Island. That's a big, huge problem, right? Because that's well above many entry-level job amounts that we see in our state. The median renter income can only afford to buy and not be considered cost burden or spending more than a third of your income in only one municipality. And but the most depressing statistic for me is the homeownership rate. Homeownership rate of 68%. It's a little lower than the national rate, but not that much. But we have made little or no progress in Rhode Island and across the country on homeownership rates for Black and Latino families. And that means, as you pointed out earlier, that several generations of families have literally had that door shut to them on wealth creation strategies that we know homeownership can do and provide some level of economic security to individuals. Just some more statistics kind of back up your argument and give you a local face about why this matters for health purposes and why this, while we're still in the midst of a public health crisis, why housing and making sure people are safely housed is so critical. The number of unsheltered Rhode Island just jumped up considerably during the pandemic, caused mostly by the economic meltdown that we saw caused by the public health crisis. But the other statistic that I would point out is that of the 11,000 fastest growing jobs in our state or considered high growth occupations, 72% of those do not pay enough either. And so that's a big important thing to think about. It's a big important thing to think about in terms of, as you try to find buyers and people who want to become homeowners, but it's important for your business too, right? Because it means you can't recruit and retain workers, you can't get workers to fill backroom operations and potentially lower wage jobs that you may need to grow your business as well. So there's a lot of challenges in the state on housing, and a lot of these statistics you could substitute in any other state in the country and have many of the similar challenges. So I'll say the bad news first, but I will say that I also have some reason for optimism, but I'll stop and shut up and let others talk for a few minutes.
Thank you so much. Melina, would you like to add to that?
Sure, and I love that Brenda's got some optimism because I would say it feels like a lot more bad news these days comparatively to good. I think it's important, my screen keeps changing here, full screen, to also, say to Brenda's points around, the wage issues and a tenant actually being able to access rents that they can afford. It implies that, not only are housing costs stable, but other costs are stable also, right? And so as we're watching the cost of food and gas and pretty much everything go up, this isn't really just about how a person can save money, but how can they not fall behind as other costs are also rising, right? This ability to pay 30% of your income towards housing implies that you can accomplish everything else with the other 70%. And that isn't, I don't know whether that number is realistic anymore because all of that's based on gross, not net anyway. The other piece that I think, to complement what Brenda was saying is that, the National Low Income Housing Coalition just released its updated housing wage figures. So the housing wage in Rhode Island is $21.51 per hour, which is what you need to earn in order to afford the average 2-bedroom rental in this state. Our minimum wage, I believe, is somewhere around $11 and a quarter, maybe. The average renter wage is somewhere around $14. So the difficulty of becoming a homeowner, the math is pretty easy to see that there's a very large gap there. And so I think it is very difficult for people to consider, even affordable rentals at this point, home ownership being just so far at the end of the spectrum. And I think we know based on sort of the demographics in Rhode Island, I can't speak for other places, but we have predominantly more low wage jobs than we do higher wage jobs. So I think, Brenda's comment around tenancy, that really is, unless housing prices come way down or wages go way up, that is very much the reality for a lot of folks, and home ownership becomes very aspirational, to the point of maybe not being realistic at all. So that's probably not the least bit positive, but I think if we're attempting to solve problems, we're not going to do that if we do it through rose-colored lenses. So I think we can only solve problems if we're willing to articulate what they actually are and have honest dialogues with ourselves, and then we can tackle everybody else after.
So great, Melina. Thank you so much. Exactly. Terri, you want to jump in on the Virginia front?
Just a little bit, and I'm so glad for the conversation today and talking about wages and employment and how it relates to just income instability and housing instability. So from the Newport News aspect, I haven't been in this role long, so most of my information is housing related and also my personal relationship that I have with Whiter Path. But I would say in Newport News, our median household income is about $51,000, and then just from that, I will jump to me being a homeowner now and having made $51,000 and purchasing a home. It was immensely difficult. My decision to be able to do that was because I was a renter and paying too much rent. So basically what I'm saying is I agree with everything that Brenda and Melina, I'm sorry if I mispronounce it, has said in regards to just, the social determinants that affect housing and also affect choices. In Newport News right now, we're going through a neighborhood revitalization through the Choice Neighborhood Initiative. So a lot of our families that are in we call the Marshall-Ridley footprint or the Marshall-Ridley area, they've received Section 8 vouchers and they're going to be moving to other neighborhoods. Ideally to housing advocates and housing authorities and a lot of city individuals, this sounded like something great. And it is great. But when you think about it and you're giving someone who has been on public housing or Section 8 a voucher for several years and sometimes, a generational thing, to go tell them, now go find another rental home and you can be a homeowner later and come back to this community. It's not that easy. When the community is not built to, speak to those types of inconsistencies, then it makes it really difficult for residents to obtain rental housing and to obtain home ownership. We have seen a low inventory of rental housing as it relates to quality and affordable rental housing. I like to put quality in front of it because quality makes a difference. Someone can have an affordable rental home, but the maintenance of that home is terrible. So then their health and different things start to falter. And we see that a lot in Newport News and also in the Hampton area of Virginia. Right now, we do have some renters education programs and also some property maintenance programs that provide resources to individuals that are in homes that are less than habitable, but those individuals still they still have to live, they still have to work, and they still have to enjoy the community. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we see right now in the area that I'm working in is not only affordable housing, but quality affordable housing. As far as the homeownership, the housing market, and the housing front, it's been really difficult as far as there's been a high housing inventory, but the prices have just been so escalated. I would say when I purchased this past summer, I had seen, I mean, people outbidded me, y'all, I'll tell you, 30,000 and 60,000 over asking price. And when you think about it, and you think about the income that you have in the community, and the income you don't have in the community, then you know that those individuals, may not have received, housing education, they may not have the resources, or this might just be the right time for them to buy. But for me as a housing counselor, this is a very scary time in the area as far as homeownership and renters education and the affordable housing market. And then also in Newport News, we are seeing a big increase in sales in what we call middle neighborhoods. And middle neighborhoods are those neighborhoods that are mostly single family neighborhood homes where individuals go to start families and create homes. But no one can afford those homes. So while the homes are on the market, there's no one that's able to afford them. And for a family of about 3, and you want to get a 3 or 4 bedroom home, just think of the challenges they would have on that limited income, with our median income in the area being $51,000. So those are just some of the things that we see on the front right now in the Newport News area. And then with that too, the median home sale, I would just add, is about $370,000. Our numbers don't speak to what we can afford in the area. So housing affordability is really big, and it just speaks to the work that I'm doing right now, trying to revitalize the neighborhood. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and what resources everyone has to offer.
Terri, thank you so much for just painting that picture for us of what's happening in Newport News so succinctly. And it's a great segue to my next question, which has to do with housing stability. So in Rhode Island, Brenda and Melina, if you could just kind of paint a similar picture for us of what does housing stability look like in Rhode Island in particular. Terri, you spoke specifically to some of the displacement that's happening in the Newport News area, where families are actually being displaced from the community that they lived in. And your organization's HR CAP, and now with your role at the City of Newport News, you're right at the epicenter of providing housing education to help people find housing since they're being displaced, work with vouchers to do that, but then also rebuild their communities because they're being moved out of the communities that house them. And this is a typical story that happens across our country. So Brenda and Melina, would you like to fill in what you see happening in Rhode Island and what you think counts as stable housing?
Want me to go first, Brenda?
You go first this time, Melina.
Okay. I think really we are seeing a lot of displacement. We also at the Housing Network right now have the privilege, I guess if that's what we're going to call it, on working on the state rental assistance program with our housing finance agency. We're processing applications for people facing eviction through the court system. And, in some instances, we're able to keep people housed, and in other instances, there's just needing to be a move on strategy. And we are able to provide assistance with security deposits and forward facing rent. The challenge is there are no units. Rhode Island has produced about 20% in 2020. The number of building permits that we pulled was about 20% of what we were building in the late 1980s. So we just don't have the housing inventory here to support people given increased demand. And I'm sure Brenda has the awesome slide that shows that. So when folks are saying they can't find a housing unit, that's a very real thing. The units that are available, we're seeing rents, into the mid and low $2,000 range. That's not really attainable for people at all. And at the moment, really, we're seeing explosion of people using hotels as housing units, frankly. And I know because I serve as the landlord through the rental assistance program for 12 families right now who have the ability to secure security deposit and forward facing rent, but can't find a unit to apply it to that's in, anywhere within their price point. So, and I go and I pay the hotel bill. And I know there are hundreds of families living in hotels because I'm in the lobby paying bills for 12 of them. So I think we're at a real crisis point. If you're following the politics in Rhode Island at all, you will have seen that a senator spent last night camped out on the lawn of the State House because we have a massive unsheltered crisis in the moment. We have insufficient shelter beds and insufficient housing units to actually house people or to even offer them shelter in this moment. So we are really at a critical mass, and maybe Brenda can offer something really
I'll
uplifting.
offer one more depressing statistic and then turn around a question to the group, I think. So for the first time ever, we have a wait list for shelter beds at this point. Think about that for a minute, a wait list for a shelter, right? For an emergency shelter bed. Again, you know, rent was just too high for many people before COVID. COVID just added more economic instability for many people. And so the struggle is real and continues. I saw some comments in the chat about real life stories that people are seeing and facing as well too. So, you know, and the thing that I get a lot of questions on about all the time is then, well, geez, isn't this just a, you know, a supply and demand problem, right? You know, if there's such a demand, why doesn't supply go up? So I'll throw the question back out to all of you. What do you think of when you think about a home and housing? I mean, what are some images that pop into your head? I don't know, Sarah, if people have the ability to throw things into chat.
I think so.
What do you think about? Are they positive comments, positive images, not? Sorry, I can't see the chat.
I'm just looking to see if anybody's.
Yeah, so family gathering, somebody added in, and we'll give people a few more seconds to see if there's anything else. Safety, thank you, Jason. Positive, warm, safe. Great. So what happens if I now say I want to build affordable housing in your community? Do any of those descriptions change? Does your image start to change? No, for most of you. That's good. Wish you were at the zoning hearings.
Hey, everybody who's saying no should get out and vote and make sure.
Because that's exactly the problem,
politicians
right?
do what
Is
they
that,
like.
you know, everybody is very concerned about all of these issues. Everybody's concerned that we've got, you know, a state senator sleeping on the lawn of the State House to raise awareness about homelessness numbers, you know, and that we still are probably about at least 100 beds short for winter shelter and emergency shelter, depending on which numbers you believe. But when we say we want to build affordable housing in your neighborhood, all hell breaks loose. Nobody wants it. We spend, you know, all kinds of hours and years not only assembling the funding resources to build and develop that housing, and this is what Melina's membership does on a regular basis, but we also do not have people are just like, nope, not in my backyard. Not, you know, we don't need more kids in the schools. We don't want those people in our community. And trust me, we've heard it all at the zoning and planning board meetings. So I think that's the challenge, is, you know, trying to make it very clear that who we're talking about are people who are already in your neighborhoods and communities, but also people who are providing and are essential parts of your community. And so it's, you know, it's that history, and I'm glad to hear that you've been thinking and talking about redlining and zoning and other things. I hope you have read The Color of Law, or have that on your reading list to look at how education policy and how housing policy rather has created unequal educational systems in our country as well too. So there's a lot of food for thought there. But I mean, and just look at these statistics for the Rhode Island based folks from Portsmouth and Newport and the Aquidneck Island communities, you know, where housing prices just have grown considerably. In Middletown alone, 23%. And a household would need an annual income of $112,000. And as Melina already pointed out, we're well below inventory levels. We've just been underproducing housing. We do about 1,000 building permits per year in Rhode Island. Our peak of building permits was in the mid 80s when we were at closer to 7,500. And a lot of that is because of restricted zoning, local barriers, local land use, things that have prevent building and developing. Ironically, a lot of what we consider iconic in Rhode Island and in our Wickford villages and our city centers like in Newport and other places could not be built under current zoning laws. The opposition always shows up at zoning board hearings. The people and the proponents for projects often do not, or not able to articulate their case at those meetings. And so it can take, anywhere from 4 to 6 years to fight the local battles in order to get things built. And that does not help us right now when we've got 100 people who need shelter and need a bed right now. So that, I'll get off my soapbox for that, but that's the challenge. And so I guess I would challenge back to everybody, who knows who's on their zoning board? Who knows who's on their planning board? Have you ever been to a meeting? If you haven't, you should go.
So that's a wonderful segue. Thank you so much to my next question, which was about advocacy and what we can do as individuals, as a company, but also how do we build into some of the federal advocacy that's taking place, but also some of the local advocacy that you're a part of. So if you could just paint a picture of, in Rhode Island and Virginia, on the federal level, what are the coalitions or what is the advocacy that's underway, and what are roles that we could play as individuals or as a company or as Wider Path?
Well, I think as Brenda already said, obviously at the federal level, all politics really end up being local. I mean, at least for Rhode Island zoning, and as a former community planner, I can say that there are real implications to land use policy that affect how and what's been developed in this state, or the lack thereof. And so all politics are local. Nothing precludes you from showing up to your planning board meeting and listening and standing up when somebody says, we don't want those projects here, to say that those projects mean me or my family member, right? And so you don't have to be an advocate in, a real sense of, a lobbyist or anything. Anybody can be an advocate in their community. You just need to show up. And I do think that local input really does drive policy. And we've seen that play out in communities where we have had, small successes in building affordable housing, that there was opposition on the front end, and then they happened, and people thought they were great, or they really enhanced the community, and people seemed more willing to come out and speak on behalf of those things. So I think, the federal policy work is really important, and we do a fair amount of that. The state work is really important also, but at least as an organization, the Homes RI work, I'd really like us to do more local, take a more local focus, because it's harder to do top down and say, let's convince this, and then you still have to convince everybody below to do it, right? Like the state can say anything. We have a low mod act that says 10% of your year-round housing stock has to be affordable, but it actually requires that those 39 municipalities actually do that. I find it easier, maybe just let's spend the time convincing the communities to do it. And then it gets easier to create laws because everybody's on board already, or there's less opposition, right? We're not fighting 39 municipalities to talk about why it can or can't happen in their community. So I would offer that. Brenda's far better versed on the federal stuff. I like local policy much better.
I don't know if Terri wants to add something, but just quickly on the infrastructure funding and money that Congress has already passed, well, not directly funding housing, has a huge impact on our ability to develop. And so again, sitting in, advocating at local tables, many communities are getting, there's not only state allocations, but there's city and town allocations. So going to and participating in or supporting groups that say some of that money needs to be directed to address infrastructure issues in low to moderate income neighborhoods and communities. We need to address lead and water pipes and all other things. And in many of communities, many of those are lower income communities as well too. So while there's not a lot of housing dollars in the infrastructure money, the Build Back Better bill, which passed the House but is still working its way through the Senate, as you know, has a lot of housing money in that bill. And so fingers crossed, we're hoping for a really nice holiday present from the Senate that will allow us to build. And, you know, I know there's lots of debate and discussion around the cost, and that's a real issue that we need to address as the government. But to me, it's the cost of not doing this as well too, and the cost that we pay through other parts of the budget when we don't invest into housing. So I don't see it as a cost. I see it as an investment. This housing and the housing field and the arena has been a field that we have been under investing in for a long time. And we are now seeing on a regular basis the impact of that lack of investment. So you know, arguing our congressional delegation in Rhode Island is fabulous on these issues, but hearing it from another voice, you know, the poor delegation and their staff hear from people like Melina and I all the time. But if somebody else adds their voice, somebody from a different sector adds a voice that provides much more credibility, and they hear things differently from different voices. So I'd encourage you and others individually and collectively to add your voices to those, the need for passing that in the Senate.
Thank you so much. And Terri, you want to jump in?
I don't have much to say. I really think Brenda and Melina, summed it up fairly well. I do want to just encourage everyone because you hit a lot of high points as you talk about affordable housing. Right now, we're working on a mixed income community through the Choice Neighborhood Initiative. So I'm sure all of you can imagine some of the kickback that we got. And a lot of this speaks to the transformation plan that we have right now in Newport News through the Choice Neighborhood Initiative. So Sarah, I'm going to send you the link. If you can probably send that out to everybody, but if you all go to the Newport News Choice Neighborhood site, there's a lot of great information on just what we talked about today as far as transforming communities, and also how affordable housing benefits communities and can help to change the mindsets of individuals in those communities. So that's all I have to add. I really look forward to next upcoming discussions and sessions, and to just please take a part in your community. That's one of the things with my neighborhood revitalization job is training individuals on the local zoning ordinances, how to join a city board or commission. Those are some of the things that can be done on a local level. So I do think Embrace, and I think Wider Path for all of your support for my housing counseling programs and all of the initiatives in the city. I'm really excited to hear what's going on in Rhode Island, New York as well.
You know what, Terri, thanks again for that segue, because I want to go a little deeper into what you brought up. And Brenda, I'm wondering if you could specifically speak to some of the coalitions that you're a part of and some of the work that you're advancing in the state of Rhode Island. And Melina, if you could add in, and then Terri, if I could bring that question back around to you. And Melina, would love to hear just the CDC network itself, if you can kind of help us understand how that works and what you are able to do as a network of community development corporations. I think that would be really helpful for people to hear as well. So anybody can jump in, but those are some great talking points. I think that would help people.
Sure. I mean, I think mostly, at the end of the day, if I'm, to be fair, they're really all competitors, right? They're producing a similar thing in different spaces throughout Rhode Island. But again, I think they're the biggest power that they have together, and that's our role, is to really package it and talk in a unified voice around how we bring more resources to the table so that they can do their jobs, and they look different from community to community. And some of our members do more home ownership, some have a higher emphasis on rentals. It really depends on the whole point of community development work, as Terri will probably attest to, is it's based on what that community needs. And so even though we are a statewide entity, we talk in a global perspective to say, we just need more resources. We need more timely access to dollars. We need less restrictive dollars in order to really do the work that every community needs, and nothing always fits into these small little boxes. So our job is really to centralize that message, pull them together, give them a space to do some peer-to-peer learning. We try to provide some trainings. COVID's thrown us off our game a little bit. How we work in a remote environment isn't really attuned to how you do community development work necessarily. It's very hands-on. So I think, there is that sort of tension of that they're ultimately competitors. And because we've been so under-resourced in this state, I think Brenda had alluded to it somewhere else. Rhode Island, we just passed a couple of bonds. Our average investment per capita is around $20 and change right now. But pre-bond investments, when we don't have those resources, our per capita investment is somewhere around $5 and maybe 36 cents if I'm being generous. So really low. Massachusetts comparatively is somewhere around $101 per capita, and Connecticut is around $98 per capita. So really underinvesting. So it makes the competitive nature of the work just that much more because they're competing for really scarce dollars. So I'll see if Brenda or Terri have anything else to add to that.
Terri, I know you've got to run. If you have one more minute, can you just tell us what the coalitions look like in Newport News? If you need to jump, we totally understand.
Well, certainly. So some of the key players that we work with right now, and I'll say on the state level, we work with Virginia Housing, or the Virginia Housing Development Authority formerly. We also work with the Virginia Housing Alliance. They're a really great resource for reports and information. But also through the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, we've been able to form a Citizens Advisory Committee, which includes citizens and individuals that work and live in the community. And they actually serve as an advisory board to let us know what's being talked about in the community, what resources are needed, and what information should be spearhead in the community. And then additionally, we have a service provider network that we forged as well with over 85 partner agencies, institutions, and colleges that work with us to provide wraparound resources for our customers that are going through the Choice Neighborhood Initiative Revitalization. So those are just some of the entities that we work with. One other thing is I did want to encourage everyone to look at the Virginia or the HUD website for the point in time count if you're interested in more information on just homelessness and the state of how that looks in the different localities. But I do have to jump off for 1 p.m. I really appreciate the opportunity. Brenda, you're always just so very informative. I really want to pick your brain one day. And Melina, I'm so glad to meet you. Embrace Wider Path. I am far more than thankful for everything you've done for me. Y'all have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Terri, for being with us. Enjoy your appointment. I know many people have to jump off now too. Brenda, can you just end us with a call to action on the Rhode Island front or on the affordable housing front, homeownership front? What would you like to see us do? And what are initiatives we can plug into?
Sure. So I think Melina already mentioned Homes RI. Obviously, we're always recruiting and always looking for people to participate in that. As I said, I think there are lots of local actions that groups can take in Rhode Island. The HESs, the health equity zones in Newport and other that are working throughout Aquidneck Island are always working and looking for people to participate in those, and housing is a main focus of their work as well too. So joining and becoming familiar with some of those local efforts. There's a lot of local working groups, particularly again in Newport area, working particularly on the plans for the North End and how to make sure that housing and some housing affordability happens there as well too. So I think engaging with folks, educating yourselves about the local process. We are in the beginning of developing some curriculum and some trainings around kind of understanding the local development process, understanding who are the players at the local level, and so we'll definitely share that with you as that gets taken over. But if you haven't already called the congressional delegations, particularly if you're in other states in the Senate, I'd urge you to do that and tell them why housing matters to you. So just show up, speak up, and stand up is what advocates say and do all the time. So we need more of everybody to do it.
I just want to add for those of us, feel free to jump if you need to jump. We know we're right at the hour. We thank you so much for attending and for being here and for weighing in with comments. We'll go through and make sure we answer any of these with a follow-up email. But just want to say that in Rhode Island especially, there's an initiative to make sure that every municipality has 10% of its units as affordable housing units. And so that's something that can also be advocated for.
Right. And right now, only 6 out of the 39 communities actually meet that goal. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Yep. So thank you so much, Brenda. Thank you so much. Melina put a call to action. Do you want to say it for anybody who's lingering out loud?
Sure. I'm always happy to pitch this. I think at the end of the day, this is a wage problem, not necessarily could be solved by housing. So $22.51 is the housing wage. And I would encourage people who support people having access to housing to pay their staff as such. That's a policy we have in our organization. And obviously, I get it. It's a price tag and we sacrifice other things to do that. But again, it's difficult to advocate for to solve a problem if you're simultaneously contributing to it. And I did put in, again, we're a monitoring agent. Banks and financial institution employees are the #1 application that I receive for affordable housing, either on the rental or on the home ownership side, followed closely secondly by entry-level healthcare workers. So just some food for thought, maybe.
Love it. Love all of this. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks for everything that you do in the world. And as Wider Path Home, we are here to be your team, to wrap our arms around you. And so we look forward to continuing the conversation about how we can support you, how we can be a part of the advocacy, but also about the home ownership education and how we can plug right into what you're doing and join you in that homeownership education and get the word out about how to help homeowners get into homes and walk with them through the process in the way that you do and build in supports for the work that you do. So thank you so much for being here, everybody. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we will put this recording out for sure so you can share it far and wide. And we will have more Lunch and Learn starting in January, learning more markets, learning more housing collaborators who are doing great work. So stay posted for our next series, which will begin in January. Thanks again, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, Melina. That was so wonderful. Really great to meet you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Yep. Hey, Ryan.
How's it going?